and I think we're all waiting to hear. If you'd like to
Great.
carry on.
Thanks, Keith. I'm going to share my screen. So my hope is that if I click this button, can I get a thumbs up? Can everybody see that? Okay, great, lovely. Thanks very much for the introduction, Keith, and thanks Roger and Brian as well. It's really nice to be with everybody today. This was originally part of talks that we did for our Heritage Open Days last September, which for obvious reasons moved online. We do normally do tours at the tramway, and it's only in September that we actually do behind the scenes tours for Heritage Open Days. But for us, this was an opportunity to try something a little bit different. And it was also prompted by a collaboration. So we work quite closely with the local Museums Trust and the local library for our archives and images. And over the first lockdown, we were sharing lots of images of the cliff railways around Scarborough on Twitter and on Facebook. And there were so many fantastic images, and it just felt like to be able to put them all together. And this is really the culmination of that process, really. So it's going to be a very visual tour. It's very much about images that we were sharing last year on social media. But my hope is that you'll maybe see parts of Scarborough and sides of Scarborough that you've never seen before, and certainly attractions that are long gone. So if I, okay, here we go. So this really covers a golden era in Scarborough. So we start off in 1875 and the Fifth Cliff Railway opened in 1930. So this period, late Victorian going into the 20th century, really was a golden era in Scarborough, where there were so many visitors. And I would say that the Cliff Railways were in due mainly for three reasons. There were huge attractions, very ambitious attractions in Scarborough that were entertaining and drawing these visitors. There was also obviously the topography of Scarborough with its very steep cliffs that made cliff railways ideal for the town. And also there were also very ambitious businessmen and entrepreneurs who were prepared to take a bit of a risk and try new endeavours. So Scarborough was a real centre for those kind of very ambitious, new endeavours that meant that there were 3 cliff railways that were actually opened before anywhere else in the country. So the South Cliff, Queen's Parade and Central were opened in just a very short 6-year period before there were cliff railways anywhere else in the country. So what I will say at this point is I will take questions at the end. So if you do want to add comments, any questions in the comment box, you're very welcome to. But there's so much material, all these images to get through, that I am going to probably save the questions until the very end. But you're very welcome to put any comments or questions in the comment box as we go along. So for those who aren't familiar with Scarborough's geography, this is a really simple map. It's actually taken from the Tramway Review of 1975, but it shows the 5 cliff railways that we'll be travelling through today. Starting down here in the South Bay, we'll be travelling north to the Queen's Parade. And here, this is going to be significant. This was a pier that was built. No longer there, obviously, for those that do know Scarborough. We'll be travelling back to the South Bay for the Central Tramway, and then just, I want to say within a few yards of Central Tramway is the St Nicholas lift, and then finally back to the North Bay. So the North and the South Bays are separated by this very distinctive, very large headland with the castle on top of it. But the one thing that the two bays do have in common is the steep cliffs down to the beach. So we begin in Scarborough of 1875. And it was a very busy place already, and mainly in part because of the spa that had been built. So there was a spa in this location from the mid-1600s when they found the acidic waters that were running into the South Bay. So at the time, these were believed to have medicinal purposes. So people started to visit to take the waters. And also it was unique in that there was obviously the sea the sea very close by. So unlike places like Harrogate and Bath, there was the sea as well as the spa waters. So it meant that it was a very popular place for visitors. So the spa building that we can see here in this very striking, very beautiful image was actually built in 1858. The designer was Joseph Paxton, who'd also built the grounds of Chatsworth and Crystal Palace in London. And as we can see here, so there were the hotels and the accommodation to the top of the cliff, and it was a very steep journey down to the spa. So there was a bridge that was built in 1827 to improve the access, but obviously it was still a bit of an issue if you think of the costume, the outfits of the day. This was not a convenient journey to take. So the number of visitors to Scarborough grew in the mid-1800s, mainly in part because of the arrival of the main line railway from York. So the station just here to the right with its distinctive clock tower was built in 1845, and the designer was G.T. Andrews. And interestingly, this was the same year that Thomas Cook began organising the first commercial trips. So the increasing numbers of middle-class visitors were travelling on the railways and really looking for entertainment. And the spa at the time was developing from just the health benefits of the spa into more of an entertainment centre. So the company itself, the limited company, was formed in 1873. So if we look here on the statistics, the opening was in July of 1875, but the company was formed in 1873. It was the Scarborough South Cliff Tramway Company, and it was formed by Mr. Hunt, who was the owner of the nearby Prince of Wales Hotel, which we can see actually at the top of the cliff here. So he used the same model as they'd used on the mainline railways. It was privately funded by the sale of shares. So they started out with a capital of £4,500, all in sales of shares in the company. This is equivalent to about £500,000 in today's money. But by 1879, they found that this wasn't enough, so they actually raised that capital to £9,000. So originally, the line was originally a water balance line. So they used Crossley gas engines to pump the seawater from the bottom station all the way to the top. And it was this type of Crossley gas engine that they used. So it was a gas engine, notably. And this actually changed later on to be steam pumped. So the type of operation when it first opened in 1875 was very similar to that of the Folkestone Cliff Railway. Sadly, the Folkestone is not currently in operation, but we can see the operation in action here in this video. So my hope is if I press play, you'll be able to see. And it just shows really clearly when the spa lift first opened, it was a very different type of operation and actually used the water balance system. So if I press play. So here we have the pipe actually ran up through between the two lines carrying the seawater, and there was a triangular underframe underneath each carriage that filled with the seawater until the top carriage was heavier than the bottom carriage. And the brake operator had to be quite skilled in order to manage the water and the braking system. So obviously the heavier carriage descends and the lighter carriage travels up the line. And we can see really clearly the pipe there for filling the two tanks. So the Folkestone line was opened in 1885, which was obviously 10 years after the Scarborough lift. And there is similar operation still today at Saltburn, Linton and Lynmouth, and there is a modern water balance line at the Centre for Alternative Technology in Machynlleth in Wales. That just gives you a really clear idea of what that operation looked like when it first opened. So the South Cliff opened to the public on the 6th of July in 1875. Sadly, we don't have dates on a lot of these images, so I can't tell you that this is around the time, but we can imagine just how busy Scarborough was at the time. There were 1,400 passengers on the first day of travel, and we can see clearly from the signage here at the bottom that the fare to travel was a penny at the time. So the first cars here, just visible. It's not great quality, this image, but you can imagine how old a lot of these images are. The first car seated 14 people along one side of the car, and the carriages were joined together by a single cable of 20 tons braking strength. Unfortunately, a large fire at the spa in 1876 was really damaging for business at the spa lift. It took 4 years for the spa to be reopened. So obviously during this time, there was very little traffic on the lift. But it was during this time that the operation changed from the gas-powered pumps to the steam operation. And by 1888, the line was carrying about 250,000 passengers per year. We can see just how busy Scarborough was from these images. After the changes to the pumping system in 1879, there were little changes in terms of the operation. That was until the 1930s. So these images are actually from obviously after the 1930s, but we can see really clearly that that underneath the carriages now, there aren't the water tanks. This is because in the 1930s, it actually changed to electric operation by the fitting of a 90 horsepower electric winding motor. The carriages were also changed at this time to 12-seater cars. And this was prompted by a similar change that had happened at the Central Tramway Company. So it was in 1966 that 2 of the major shareholders in the company bought out all the shares, and they changed it from a limited company to a partnership. Now, this partnership survived until 1993, when Scarborough Council bought the railway for £110,000. It was also in the 1960s that there was increasing number of people beginning to travel overseas for holidays. So visitor numbers started to decline in Scarborough, in a lot of seaside resorts. Over the years since taking over the operation in 1993, Scarborough Council have spent a lot of money in terms of upgrading the system. And this image is one of the most recent from inside the engine room. So this was 2019. They actually had a major upgrade in the engine room. Now, as it's council owned, they don't do tours as we do at Central Tramway. So this is quite an exclusive image that you can see, and we can see the gearbox here, the motor, and significantly the sheave wheel that holds the ropes. So this is a really vital part of any funicular operation. And it's actually a friction operated. So it's friction that holds those ropes onto the wheel. We'll be covering more about the operation side of the railways in the next talk, but I thought it might be interesting just to share this image to show that the council have invested a huge amount of money in the lift, and it is really important because the spa is still a very popular venue under normal circumstances, obviously. That's meant that the Cliff Railway has survived because it's integral to that, the popularity of the spa. So the spa was to inspire more Cliff Railways to open around the country, and it's rumoured that perhaps a visitor from Linton and Lynmouth visited Scarborough, and it obviously inspired the water balance line at Linton. That is just a rumour, but yes, there were lots of others that were inspired. And it did actually set 2 really key traditions in terms of Cliff Railways in the UK that differed slightly from their continental and American across the Atlantic. There was The main difference in terms of the tracks, we can see here with the Scarborough Spa, the parallel tracks was something that was used much more widely in the UK than overseas, whereas here we can see the line in Freiburg that was opened not too long after in 1899 uses the passing loop system. And the other tradition that the spa perhaps inspired was the use of the horizontal carriages as opposed to the stepped carriages. As with any rules, there are exceptions to the rules. So those that have been to Aberystwyth, for instance, will be familiar with, they do have a stepped carriage, but it's much more common for us to see this type of horizontal carriage in UK funiculars. So we travel back in time again. So we're returning to 1878. So just 3 years after the opening of the spa lift, and we're back. We're heading this time to the North Bay in Scarborough. So in 1869, a very dramatic promenade pier was built. It cost around £15,000 and was 1,000 feet long. As we can see, very ambitious, very dramatic, and it was intended to draw more visitors to the North Bay, which did tend to be much quieter than the South Bay, because obviously the spa had been drawing visitors to the South Bay for many years. So we can see from this picture, it's very similar in terms of its access to the spa. We can see this very steep cliff, very difficult in terms of access. So it did affect business. So it did mean that the pier, unfortunately, wasn't as successful as they'd hoped. So they looked to try and remedy that. So it was in 1878 that the Queen's Parade Tramway Company was registered. And again, they used the same model. So shares were sold in the business, this time with a starting capital of £3,500. And again, this photo shows really clearly we have the hotels and accommodation at the top of the cliff and a very steep walk down to the pier. So the proposed plans were originally published in 1877 in The Engineer at the time, probably a publication that a lot of you will be familiar with. So the original plans actually had a steam operated motor and engine, along with a bridge that went over the line, here we can see. And we have the lattice work supported by the iron pillars here. So this was published in 1877 and was intended to invite tenders for the contract. In the end, they didn't end up using the steam motor system. It actually was a water balance line with steam pumps to pump the water again. So very similar in terms of operation to the spa lift. And the main contractor was Wade and Sons of Leeds. So interestingly, the two steam engines that pumped the seawater were supplied by John Fowler and Co, also of Leeds. And interestingly, they also supplied the engines for the funicular on Mount Vesuvius. So construction began in the spring of 1878, and the main shareholders, just as in the spa lift, were local hoteliers, local business owners who really wanted to profit from the success of the line, but also improve the access down to the pier. So we can see the lattice work here, the girders supporting the line, and we can see the bridge over the line here. Unfortunately, just as the Cliff Railway was due to open on the 8th of August, as they were trying the line out, one of the carriages actually broke free and crashed into the bottom station. Now, this did seriously damage the bottom station and did mean that they had to take 6 weeks to repair the work. And it wasn't until the October of that year that they were actually able to open. So interestingly, this is the same same view down the pier, but this time we can see really clearly the cliff railway just to the very slightly to the right of the pier. Unfortunately, the line was beset by many problems, and they found that the ground around was actually not very steady. So it did mean that there were several incidents and accidents over the subsequent years. Mainly, the main issues were with the water pump supply and recurring landslips. And it was after a significant landslip in August of 1887 that the line actually was forced to close. So the Cliff Railway closed in 1887, and it was in 1889 that the pier was sold. They actually built a new restaurant and large building at the foot of the pier, but it really was never very successful. And it was a short time afterwards, in 1905, that the pier was actually destroyed in a storm. So sadly, the success of the Cliff Railway and the pier were very closely tied, and neither was to be proven to be very successful. So 1881, so just 6 years after the opening of the spa, we head back to the South Bay for the Central Tramway Company. So the Grand Hotel had been completed in 1867 at a cost of £100,000, which is equivalent to about £10 million in today's money. The area to the top of the Grand Hotel was also a popular destination for visitors. There was the Royal Hotel that had reopened in the same year, and this whole area of St. Nicholas Cliff was very popular with visitors to the spa. There was also a large refreshment room that had opened in 1871 that seated 2,000 people. So this whole area was prime location. Here we can see the spa bridge, so a very short distance to the spa. And there was also another large attraction that we'll get to that had opened in 1877. So we can imagine in 1881, this area was very vibrant, very busy, very popular. And the land just to the right or to the north, as we're looking at it geographically, actually belonged to the Woodall family. So the Woodall family were a very prominent business family in Scarborough. John Woodall was in residence at the time, and he'd been the mayor of Scarborough 4 times. He was also from a banking family, so the Woodalls were bankers in Scarborough, but he was also very well travelled. So he was a marine biologist with particular interest in the fisheries industry. So he owned all this area that we can see. These were his gardens. This was his boating. So he also built boats because he was obviously interested in the fishing. So he saw the success of the spa lift and saw an opportunity. So here we have John Woodall. So his family home was at the top of that cliff. This is St. Nicholas House, and it's now the council building. But at the time, we can imagine just how grand a residency this was. And it was all down this street where there were hotels, there were long rooms for entertainment. So it was a very busy, vibrant place. So the tramway company was actually formed on the 20th of January in 1881. And we can see here, this is from the Scarborough Heritage Society, that the Central Tramway is Britain's oldest surviving cliff tramway company. And we can see from the date that this year will be our 140th anniversary. So the reason that we have this plaque is actually because it's the limited company that was formed in January of 1881 that still survives today. So there is sometimes some confusion. It's not the tramway itself, because obviously, as we know well now, the spa lift was opened before the Central Tramway, but it was actually the limited company itself that still survives today. And just to show, this is that original certificate of incorporation from January of 1881. So just as the Queen's Parade lift and the spa lift, the shares were sold in the business. So obviously John Woodall had learnt lessons from the other businesses, and this time it was £10,000 worth of shares that were sold. So that initial starting capital is starting to creep up, we can see. So it was actually, each share was worth £5, so 2,000 shares were sold £5 each. And one of the shareholders, so we have this original document still today in our possession, and we can read through all the different business owners and their addresses. And one of them was Robert Lawton, who was actually the father of Charles Lawton. So the architect was Charles Augustus Bury, and the chief engineer was Thomas Feaster Morgan, and construction of the Cliff Railway took just 6 months. The original top station that we can see the designs for in this lovely drawing that's actually kept in the County Records Office, it originally contained a spacious waiting room, and this was reached by a passage between 2 shops, and there was actually a photographic studio above in the building. So again, these are just lovely plans to see. And obviously I will go into more detail of the actual operation in the next talk. But it's interesting to note that the initial operation was steam powered. So the engine house was located here, about 2/3 of the way up the track. And there was a smoke flue that took the smoke across and underneath a road. This was actually a road to the nearby Granby House. So this is the original logbook from 1881, and we can see here, so the railway opened to the public at 12:30 on the 1st of August 1881. It was a very busy day, and they actually carried 2,834 passengers on that first day. And one of the first passengers was obviously Mr. John Woodall, along with other local dignitaries and shareholders. This was actually a bank holiday and was slightly later than the planned opening. So it was about 4 weeks later than originally planned. But because it was a bank holiday, it was obviously a very successful opening. So this is one of the earliest images that we have of the Cliff Railway. And we can see the building in the background here where that smoke flue expelled. That's no longer there. And this building here to the left is also no longer there. But the original top station is very much as it was in 1881, with some updates and slight modifications. This is actually that building to the left of the top station. It's a very beautiful engraving, and it does seem quite sad that it's no longer there, unfortunately, but it was a jet shop, the McBean jet shop, and the steps that run alongside the line carry Mr. McBean's name to this day. So here we have another very early image up the tracks, and we can see the McBean building here at to the left-hand side, and notably there is an advert here for the People's Palace and Aquarium, and this is going to be something that will pop up later on in the talk. Also opened on the South Bay. These buildings to the right of the line also changed significantly, and if we look to this view, we can see just how much the Foreshore Road changed over the years. So this, we can see where the cottages and the buildings to the right, as we saw them in the image, the McBean building, and this is the large refreshment room. So this area was to change quite dramatically over the years. So in 1895, it was Mr. Woodall who decided to open an exhibition hall. This was a huge space that took the space where the boatyard had been, and was intended for an exhibition on the fishing industry. Mr. Woodall had been to a similar exhibition in Norfolk, several years before and had been inspired. These kind of exhibitions, following the success of Crystal Palace, these kind of exhibitions and exposés were very popular at the time and really brought lots of visitors to the area. So he saw, again, another opportunity, making the most of the location next to the Grand Hotel and surrounded by all the entertainment of the South Bay, to open another popular venue. So here we can see the bottom station, a slightly different angle here, but looking towards the Spar Bridge, to the south of the Grand Hotel. And these buildings that sadly were, very, it would have been lovely if these had been able to be retained, but it was around 1949 that the Foreshore Road was actually widened. So it meant that these buildings were lost, and the footprint of the bottom station actually changed around this time. So the operation of the tramway was to change around 1920. It was in 1904 that the Scarborough Tramways Company opened, and this was a road tram system around Scarborough. And we might imagine how different the South Bay would have looked and sounded at the time. So this image gives us a really clear view down the South Bay to all the entertainment that was developing along this stretch of the coastline. And we can get a real sense for the tramway was located here and was very central in terms of popularity of the South Bay. And it's something that we still benefit from today. It was around this time in the 1960s that my family, the Pursehouse family, began to buy shares in the business. So it was around 1967 that my great-grandfather, who'd been travelling with my grandmother to visit Scarborough for many years, staying at the Grand, spotted a business opportunity, much like Mr. Woodall, and began to buy shares in the Central Tramway Company. So here we can see the lift around the 1970s. So the colour had changed, and this is a really good view looking down towards the bottom station. Now, unfortunately, it was in 1975 that there was a large fire at the Olympia site. So all these buildings here were unfortunately lost in the fire, destroyed, and it did impact the Central Tramway. It did mean that we had to replace the carriages and some of the line had to be repaired. And also, as they were developing the Olympia site, so building the new building that is there today around 1980, it did affect the ground underneath the line. So there was pile driving to establish the foundations for the Olympia building, and the pile driving actually affected the integrity of the lines, and it did mean that some of the lines had to be replaced around 1980. So over the subsequent years, so since 1980, the tramway has changed, particularly since around 2012. So since that time, the business has actually invested around £500,000, really trying to return a lot of the original Victorian character to the buildings, and upgrading and improving the safety of the operation. So as I've mentioned, I will be covering this in more detail in the next talk, but here we can see the Radican gearbox. Now this was actually fitted in the 1930s, and it was around 1930 that the drive was changed from a 500 volt DC power when it was linked to the road tramway system, and in 1930, the road tram system actually closed in 1931, and it meant that the tramway had to fit a new AC drive. So the Radican, so a 60 horsepower motor and the Radican gearbox were fitted around 1931, and this is still in operation today. So we travel a very short distance this time, but we are into the 20th century. So it was a very short distance. So the Central Tramway is located, or was located here, or is still located here. And it's a very short distance just to the other side of the Grand that we are now looking, the St. Nicholas lift. So this area looked very different. So it was actually in 1877 that a large attraction was built underneath the Spa Bridge. The Scarborough Aquarium was a very ambitious, very dramatic attraction that was built underground. So it was a 2¼ acre subterranean site, and it actually cost an incredible £120,000 to build. So if we remember back to how much the Grand cost to build, it was actually more than the Grand Hotel. The architect of the aquarium was Eugenius Birch, who some may be familiar with because he was the chief engineer on the Scarborough to Whitby railway line. And he'd also designed the pier on the North Bay that we remember. The aquarium took 3 years to build, and it was a really exciting, dramatic site. It had huge water tanks, large dining rooms, grottos. There was a huge central hall, and hot water pipes circulated throughout. There was a swimming bath. We can just imagine how exciting and how glamorous this was at the time. The design was based on elaborate Indian temple designs with arches and colonnades. There are still some photos that exist, so if you are interested, there are some images to be found. But this photograph, this painting, sorry, really shows off the colours, and I just think shows how beautiful it would have been. So I thought this might be of interest. So it was in 1925 that there was actually a dramatic crash. So the road tram system, one of the road trams actually crashed into the aquarium. Nobody was killed, but we can imagine just what a sight this would have been. Goodness me. And it was around this time that the aquarium was actually sold to the local council. Similar to the pier, it wasn't as successful as they'd hoped. So the council bought the aquarium and changed it into Gala Land, where it was turned into a much wider sort of entertainment venue. So less focus on the fish and more focus on theatre and entertainment. So here we can see the Spa Bridge, in the distance the spa, and we can get a real sense for just how close all these different sites are. We can imagine the spa lift just in the distance there. But this was an incredibly exciting attraction that really did draw a lot of visitors. And at the time, there was a borough engineer, Harry W. Smith, who was very key in Scarborough's history in terms of developing attractions and amenities for visitors. He worked considerably on a lot of the parks in and around Scarborough, and he saw an opportunity for another cliff railway. Here's Harry Smith. So he looked to raise the money with the local council, but the funds were not available, which meant it fell to Sir Meredith Whittaker, who was actually the director of the Scarborough Tramways Company, to finance the lift. So if we look at the statistics here, it is worth noting that the gradient was actually much steeper than the other railways that had opened, and the track gauge was significantly wider, and this was to make the carriages able to carry more passengers, because the volume of people that they were looking to transport was significantly higher than those that had opened a few years before. So the operation was electric right from the beginning. And here's a great picture. We can see the top station here and the carriages and inside the engine room. So again, this is an image from Meccano magazine of 1960, but it shows the winding drums that held the ropes. So it was a 45 horsepower motor that wound the two steel drum, the large drums, and carried the steel cables. So here we have another great image, and we can see really clearly it is a short track, but it is a steep track. Just to the other side of the refreshment room was obviously the central tramway, and we can see the signs really clearly for Gala Land. So it was around 1945, probably before this image, but the council actually bought the St Nicholas lift from the lift company. So if we look to the bottom station, access into the carriage was straight off the pavement. There wasn't actually a bottom station, unlike at the central tramway. And the top station was the turnstiles and where people paid. So there we can see the turnstiles and the pay booth at the top station. Similar to the operation at the central tramway, there was a doorman at the bottom who opened and closed the doors for safe access to the carriages. So these were the original carriages, but we can see that it was in around 1975, so after these images, that the carriages were actually replaced with new wooden ones. And unfortunately, it was in 2007 that the St Nicholas lift closed to the public for the last time. So unfortunately, the council were unable to meet the nearly £500,000 it needed to bring the lift up to the new health and safety standards. So the two cars were moved up to the top station, and they were actually secured in place, and they now make part of a cafe at the top station. And the bottom station was turned into a cafe between 2017 and 2019. It's now a gallery space. So the hope is that it will remain open and accessible, but they are sadly no longer functioning as part of the Cliff Railway. So we travel this time for our final stop to the North Bay again. So we're 1930, so just a short time after the St Nicholas lift opened. And the area of the North Bay we can see here was very popular with visitors, but obviously after losing the pier, we can just see the very sort of last remains of the pier after that, the storm of 1905. It was a popular area to visit, and our borough engineer, Mr. Harry Smith, looked to really develop this area. So all around this area of the North Bay, he looked to develop and make more attractive for visitors. This included the development of the North Bay Railway that is still popular today. And this whole area was funded with a grant from government. It all cost around £19,000, and part of the development was to be, you guessed it, another cliff railway. So the North Cliff lift opened, oh, I think I've got the wrong date on there. It was actually August of 1930, apologies, there's the wrong date on the slide. And it was electrically operated, just as at the St Nicholas lift. And both had actually been built by the Medway Lift Company. So this was, again, a slightly broader gauge, but not as broad as the St Nicholas lift, and certainly not as steep either. The operation was with a 47 horsepower electric motor, and this time there was an 8-foot diameter rope wheel. And the colours were the same as the St Nicholas lift. These were green and cream to begin with. So similar to the St Nicholas lift, we have a doorman operating at the bottom station, and payment was taken at the top. And I love this picture because it just shows how glamorous and how exciting Scarborough would have been around this time. So in the interwar years, Scarborough was incredibly busy and very, very popular place to visit. And we know this because the figures from the central tramway attest to how many more visitors. We were over 1 million visitors during this period per year. Now the number of visitors to the central tramway are closer to 500,000. So it just shows the difference during this time, the number of visitors to Scarborough. So the boating lake was also part of Harry Smith's development of P-Zone Gap, which is this whole area here. And we can just get a feel for how popular. So the hotels to the top, and we can imagine that this was all a very popular, busy destination. Another great photo, some more great images from the Scarborough Museum's collection. So we can see at this point it's not looking quite as glamorous, not quite as dramatic, and sadly we don't have dates on a lot of these images as they have been shared with us, but we're not able to date them exactly, but we get an idea and a real feel for how the railways changed. So again, unfortunately, it was in 1997. This time the lift was council owned from the beginning, from the outset, and the council were losing around £11,000 a year on the operation. We do know this. And it was in 1997 that they faced another large bill to meet the health and safety standards at the time, and they were unable to pay this. So sadly, it did close for the last time in 1997. And our understanding is that it was actually demolished and broken down and transported to Launceston in Cornwall, where it was intended to be rebuilt. But as far as we know, it never was. So I hope that gave you a real feel for all the cliff railways of Scarborough and a real feeling for how the fortunes of the cliff railways were very closely linked to both the fortunes of the town and the attractions, the very exciting attractions that were developed in the area at the time. As visitor numbers have declined, sadly, we have lost 3 of those cliff railways. But our hope and our intention, certainly at Central, is to keep the cliff railway running as long as possible. So it is really one of our main goals, is to preserve the cliff railway for future generations to enjoy. And I will do a short plug here and say that we do have publications that the tramway we publish ourselves. We sell them at the station, but we also have them available online, and I can share the links with the group after the talk. Scarborough certainly does have a colourful history, and we do hope that it has a colourful future ahead too. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and thanks very much for letting me talk to you. I hope you've enjoyed that. And for anybody interested, there is my great-grandfather and my grandfather. And I'd like to say thank you very much from all of us at Central Tramway. We do rely on visitors to keep running, so thanks for your support.
Well, thank you, Amy. You did say you'd answer questions. Can I invite anybody to chip in? Anybody with questions? Well, can I start? When you give the length of the tramway, is it the vertical measurement or on the angle, or how is it measured?
It's the length of the tracks.
That's the length of the track,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You're all mute, so if you want to ask any questions, you better unmute yourselves.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah. Go for it.
Carry on.
Hi, it was a fascinating talk. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. These days, the cliff lift is obviously a tourist attraction in itself. In its heyday, was it a tourist attraction, or was it simply a way of getting from top to bottom?
That's a really good question. I think at the time, it was incredibly innovative. The type of operation had been used in industry, so the coal mines had been using a similar kind of system, but this was the first time that it had been used commercially for visitors and for paying people. So I do like to think it wasn't too long before that a passenger lift, Otis, the elevator, the first elevator had opened. I think that was in New York around the mid-1800s as well. And I think the technology was incredibly exciting at the time. So it was the days before aeroplane travel. So I'm sure it was part of the appeal. And I do think at the time, a penny, it was for the wealthier visitors to Scarborough. So unfortunately, it wasn't for everybody. I think a penny at the time would have been quite a high price to pay. Certainly not. They did, want that slight exclusivity, I think.
That's great. Thank you.
John Sharp. John
Yes.
Sharp, a question?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Amy. That was a fascinating talk.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a mechanical engineer, and I'm very interested in health and safety issues. Can you just give me, or give everyone, a quick outline of to what the health and safety requirements were that caused Scarborough Council to just put their hands up in horror?
I know the health and safety, so we're under the mines department of the health and safety. I might also, my dad is on the call today. I can't see him, but he's probably better placed to answer health and safety questions than I am. But I do know that there were changes that were made, and what the health and safety, what they've tried to do is reduce the dependency on human operation. So I think as much as possible, and this is something that we'll definitely be covering much more in the engineering talk. Hope you can make that, John. Yeah, so the dependency on human error, I think. So the more automation, so I think that was a significant time in terms of the changes in the Health and Safety Act, and really looking for more automation in Cliff Railway operation.
Does Amy's father want to come in there? No, we can't hear him. No, right. John, you still John,
Oh, yes.
Sharp, you still got a supplementary question?
I'm still with you. I think that was superb, and I look forward to part 2.
Thanks, John.
Thank you very much, Amy.
Glad you can make it. Right. Great.
Peter Martin, then, please.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a very interesting talk. I noticed that the St Nicholas tramway was very close to the Central tramway. Back in those days, were they in competition for customers, or was there enough business for both of them?
Yeah, I think that's something that I really tried to convey, was just how busy Scarborough was at the time. It was just incredibly popular and busy. And I think it was that borough engineer, Mr. Harry Smith, who they actually did an assessment of the Cliff Railways around that time, and they saw the need for all of them. And there was actually talk of opening another one really close by because the Central was so busy. So yes, I do think at the time, incredibly popular. And
did they have both the same prices, or did they?
Yeah, as far as we know, yes. I do have more information on the pricing, but yeah, I think I seem to remember. Oh gosh, you're testing my memory now. There was one of the lifts actually began charging a smaller fare to go down, because obviously most people use it to travel up. So yeah, I think it was the Spa lift that first changed the pricing to a smaller fare to travel down.
Right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter.
Did everybody see Roger's note that the one in Launceston is in a warehouse?
There you go.
Right, any more questions?
Could I ask?
Yes, I do. Who's that?
It's Roger.
Roger.
Then the message actually came from Victoria Stevens via me to everybody about Launceston. So thanks to Victoria for the information.
Oh, I know Victoria. Hi, Victoria.
So,
just a quick I thought that was fantastic, Amy. I'm really looking forward to
Victoria.
Next.
Thank you.
Hello. It's interesting. This is a bit of a, it's not a trick question, but you're very successful in your funicular business. And what do you think what have you got right that others have perhaps not got right? I mean, if you think about Cairngorm Mountain Railway closing down, for example, what makes people come back to you? I mean, I know why I love Central, but what's your sort of secret, I suppose? What do you hope and experience to be on the Central
I'm
tramway?
sure my dad will have his own ideas, but I would say we are incredibly fortunate where we're located. I think our location really does have so much to do with the success of the business. We are so reliant on visitors coming to our part of Scarborough. I would say the bulk of our business really is day trippers, people wanting the convenience. We do have increasing numbers of heritage visitors, those people that are interested in the experience and looking to share the experience that they had, you know, the memories that they had when they used to visit Scarborough. I think really, to be honest, a lot of our success really is down to the location. Over recent years, like I said, we've invested a huge amount of money. So for us, the focus has been on that improving safety, which we'll cover in the next talk. So improving the technology and the safety so that we're able to remain reliant, efficient, and give people the quality of experience at a good price that they're looking for when they visit Scarborough. You know, it's a resort now, unlike the Victorian times. It is very much where anybody can visit, and we try and keep the price down so that, you know, people can enjoy the experience at low cost. That's really important. Thanks, Victoria.
That's great, thank you.
Any more?
Yes, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. That was a really interesting talk.
Thank you.
That was great, very well researched. I just wondered, following on from Victoria's question, obviously the council have got various plans for the future to develop, you know, and try and get more people in and all that sort of thing. And I see recently that from the budget, they've qualified for some extra cash from the government. So I'm just wondering how you think the funicular sort of might fit into future plans. Is there a way that you can sort of get that into all these exciting developments to make it meaningful and get more customers?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. That's a really good question. Yeah, there have been plans in Scarborough to develop a site just really close by the funicular. It's called the Futurist site, and at one time there was talk that Flamingo Land were going to develop it as a sort of what was the word? Yeah, a big attraction park, roller coasters, that kind of thing, which was a little bit concerning for us in the sense that they were looking at operating some kind of lift potentially, whether it was in an elevator system. So I think a lot of our work recently has been communicating, talking with the council. We're hopeful that any development on that site and around the South Bay will be in keeping with the tone that Scarborough currently has. I think it's a very interesting line to walk, because what we're very mindful of is the Victorians were innovators. So at the time, the Cliff Railway would have been probably quite a dramatic, different, potentially a lot of people might not have liked the Cliff Railway. We do know that there was a kind of a lift. Victoria might be able to help me here. So there was something on the South Bay that was like a tall tower that was built, that was very unpopular. It was up towards the castle, and that was built around the late Victorian, early 20th century time. Very unpopular. People, local residents really didn't like it. So any development is met with some resistance, and it's a very fine line that we have to try and tread, but we're hopeful that it's the heritage of the Cliff Railways that we're really about celebrating and trying to maintain. So they will never lose that, you know, the fact that it opened in 1881, it will always be the case. So the hope is anything that is developed will be sympathetic to the area and will not affect trade and business people using the line. Fingers
All right.
crossed.
That's excellent. Thank you. Yeah, good luck with that. Yeah,
Thanks, Graham. Thank you.
Martin,
Yes, thank you. Yes, that was superb. As an ex-resident of York, we visited Scarborough many times and indeed rode on your tramway with great pleasure.
Thanks,
Clearly, you've had absolutely no income over the last summer. Your state obviously must be a little bit more perilous than you would otherwise wish. And clearly, your particular cars are not terribly COVID friendly, are they, in terms of distancing? So are you optimistic about this coming summer, that you can start to operate properly once visitors do return in any numbers?
Yeah, that is interesting. For us, what we will certainly be needing to do is reduce the capacity of the carriages. So what we have to do, we're looking to improve the ventilation in the carriages, but really for us it's about managing the numbers. So we've had to change our queuing systems, we've had to change the number of people that are able to travel in the cars to make sure that that distance is kept, and sometimes it might just be one family that are able to travel. So it will, going, you know, certainly for the short term, it will impact business because it is going to significantly reduce our capacity. But yeah, the hope is that we're able to keep operating in an efficient way. Because of the upgrades that we've done to the system, it means that we're able to run more cars through the day. Yeah, so that's all we can do really, is do it safely for everybody's sake. Thanks, Martin. Yeah, difficult times for everybody.
Nick? Nick?
Yeah.
No, you've got a hand up. It says you want to speak. You don't?
No.
No? Oh, well, right.
Peter Hopwood.
Yeah, Peter Hopwood here.
Peter Hopwood.
It was an absolutely smashing talk, Amy, about your cliff lift. Have you been open through all this lockdown business, and are you open all through the winter normally? And a second question, on the north cliff of the North Bay, I can remember a very small miniature railway running for about 100 yards. But from various publications such as the Dalesman, nobody seems to know a lot about it. Do you know anything much about it? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know about the miniature railway, no.
I can answer that.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
I've done a bit of research on that because I saw it in 1950 and it operated for about 3 years only. The operators then moved to Canada to open a railway there. They sold that miniature railway to the council, who took it over but just closed it down and never ran it. So I don't know what happened to the locomotives, but it was open just for 3 short summers of about 6 weeks in the peak holiday period, 1950 to 52.
Right, somebody knows something about it. Thanks very much.
Right.
So to answer
the second part to your question, Peter.
Yes,
well,
so
back to the first question, really, about how have you managed during lockdown to keep going, and are you open all year anyway?
Yeah, no, we've not been open at all. So we did open last summer when we were able to, so between June and November, I think, with limited capacity. But as the country's gone into the various lockdowns, we have been forced to close. That's mainly because visitors obviously aren't allowed to come to Scarborough, and like I've been saying, we are so dependent on the visitors, tourists that come to Scarborough. We do have some local trade, and we really do value the local trade, because for a lot of people it is an amenity. It's an essential amenity for them to get to and from, you know, up and down the cliff. But yeah, the majority of our business is from visitors, and really I think it would have been irresponsible, because if any of the businesses on the South Bay were open, it would essentially be a green flag for people to visit. the area, and they're just not, they haven't been allowed. Normally, so we're looking to increase the openings during the winter months. So traditionally we were actually closed between December and February for maintenance. So that was our maintenance period because visitor numbers were low. We would open for a week from Boxing Day until New Year, because Scarborough has traditionally been very popular and very busy for that week, but the rest of the winter time. But over recent years, as we've sort of increased the annual maintenance and everything's to becoming much more more regulated, we're able to open weekends during the winter. So we do have some shutdown during the winter, during the weekdays. But yeah, what we're trying to do is stay open weekends if we can.
Thank you. We tend to come to Scarborough during the winter.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. I'll be winding down now. Or is there somebody else? No? Well, thank you very much, Amy. It's been excellent. I shall be looking for... Are you there still?
Yeah. I'm still here, yes.
I shall be looking forward to the second... Let's keep the screen keep disappearing. I shall be looking forward to the second instalment in next month. My own involvement in Scarborough is very, very limited. I've only been a couple of times, although my grandparents, who were Londoners, did actually have their honeymoon in Scarborough, so I can claim that sort of tenuous connection. So until that, thank you very much again for this time, and until next time, you're moving all over the place. Until next time, thank you very much, and we'll see you again.
Thanks ever so much for having me. It's been great.
Okay.
Look forward to seeing
Thanks,
you again.
Amy.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Look forward to you next time.
Thank you.
Oh. Oh. I shall never think of Funny Mag as the oldie again. If anybody wants to see more on funiculars, funnymag.com.
While you're there, Brian.
Yes.
We ought to talk about you and myself, who wanted to resign from our positions.
Well, I don't feel as if it's possible really when we're on Zoom.
Well, we'll talk about that some other time then.
Yeah. I think we'll just go with pretend it's 2020 this year.
Right.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Right, I shall go.
Roger, can we unmute you? Oh. Roger.
There we go.
Are you? Lost you, Leanne.
I'm here.
Right, I forgot what I wanted to say now.
Oh dear. Well, here we are.
How many people's left?
Not many.
Right, I'm going.
Right, I think we're probably all going now then.
Okay, I'll close it down, shall I?
Yes. What is it? What? Oh, it's gone. Brian, I was just wondering what is the date of the next meeting? We didn't mention that, did we?
Well, there's a meeting on Saturday.
No, I mean the aim is second meeting.
27th.
Oh, sorry.
March.
Yes, I was putting it on the screen for you.
27th of March, Keith.
27th of March, yes. 2 in a month. We're doing very well. We never had on that before.
Yeah.
There you go. So the next, we should have mentioned that. I apologize. Yeah. We've got another one in 2 parts, end of April and into May. So we're doing quite well for meetings, really. They're all very good. There's a very high standard. And this one was about the right length. You do see people starting to disappear after an hour. I think you can probably hold them longer in the traditional format of meetings, but you can't. You struggle with these. We had one that went on for an hour and 40 minutes, and there were people dropping out during the talk. So from about an hour and 10 minutes onwards, you probably lose about 10 to 15% of your audience anyway. Some people don't want to stay for the questions, and that's fine. Again, today we lost about 10%, which is very good. I would say more stayed for the questions than usually do.
But it was worth staying.
More were staying for the questions today, I would say, than is typical. Well, that's because the talk finished under an hour, or whether they were just absolutely fascinated by the subject matter. I don't know. I suspect it's a bit of both. Probably more the quality of the talk, though. They shouldn't have taught. Ideally, the talk should not go over an hour with this format, in my view. Just looking at what's the pattern of people coming in and out of the meetings we've had so far, and advice from other people.
Well, Amy got it right, so that's okay.
You've got it right, Keith. You've got it absolutely spot on. Thank you very much.
I said Amy got it right. I wasn't claiming credit.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, I think Peter was. I think Brian was talking to her because he and I had a chat about it by email. So it was good. She got it absolutely right. It was her suggestion, and we endorsed it. It was good. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, goodbye, chaps.
Good stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Roger,
Yes.
I'm still waiting for Peter Brad to tell me what day he wants to do his talk now in view of the issue over the 24th.
Yes. Can you ask me to book them for you before you put them on? Because it's
Well,
there's
you
a
gave the
delay
day for
booking in.
recent. Yeah.
I know, but it's better if one person, because sometimes there's a lag between being asked and saying yes and actually getting it onto the site. You're the only person to booking them apart from me.
Okay.
So we're just learning as we go along, Ray. It's a new experience and we're learning. So yeah. All right. Well, you find out. I mean.
Yeah, I'll wait for Peter to come back to me.
You could do it later that day, or I mean, there's the day it can be weekdays, and we had a very good attendance last night, for example.
Yes.
And an excellent talk. It's I've got the recording. I had to. The recording would be on the website, unfortunately, but unfortunately, I had to edit out the beginning, and that. You can do it quite quickly, but it takes a few hours to actually become active. For the first 4 minutes had to be taken out. Anyway, all right. I should go and watch some football.
Right.
I think. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yes.